All right, today we're going to be looking at John Steinbeck's The Chrysanthemums. Now, you probably read some Steinbeck in high school. Well, I don't know. My class last semester said they read absolutely no Steinbeck. But you might have read The Grapes of Wrath or The Red Pony or Of Mice and Men. That's the one I read when I was in high school. All right, today's story is on page 1237 in your anthology. And I want us to look at the exposition first. First of all, this is taking place in Salinas, California, and this would be where John Steinbeck lived. We have two characters. One is named Eliza, and she is our protagonist, and her husband, Henry, is going to be the antagonist. He's not a villain. Their relationship is typical of a 1930s relationship in a very male-dominated society. All right, I want us to read the first few lines of the story just to I think it kind of sets the story. So the high gray flannel fog of winter closed off the Salinas Valley from the sky and from all the rest of the world. On every side it sat like a lid on the mountain and made of a great valley, a closed pot. On the broad level land floor, the gang plows bit deep and left the black earth shining like metal where the shares had cut. I'm going to skip down to the next paragraph. A light wind blew up from the southwest so that the farmers were mildly hopeful of a good rain before long. But fog and rain do not go together. All right, I underlined in my text the word closed pot because you're going to see that their relationship, she feels very closed off, very trapped in her role. Also, that line that says, but fog and rain do not go together, it kind of reminds me of Eliza and Henry. Yeah, they coincide with one another, but you're going to see a lot of, it kind of mirrors their relationships. We see a lot of struggle as far as in their communication and in romance and in their job, etc. Okay, so outwardly they look like a typical couple in the 1930s. I'm flipping over because the first thing it's going to do is the story is going to describe Eliza. And so, am I going to read it to you? Yeah, I am. So when you flip over, if you look in that second paragraph, it says, she was 35. Her face was lean and strong, and her eyes were as clear as water. Her figure looked blocked and heavy in her gardening costume. A man's black hat pulled low down over her eyes, clodhopper shoes, a figured print dress almost completely covered by a big corduroy apron with 4 big pockets to hold the snips, the trowel, the scratcher, the seeds, and the knife she worked with. She wore heavy leather gloves to protect her hands while she worked. Skipping down. Her face was eager and mature and handsome. Even her work with the scissors was overeager, overpowerful. I'm skipping down. Behind her stood the neat white farmhouse with red geraniums, red passion. Closed bank around it as high as the windows. It was a hard, swept-looking little house with hard, polished windows and a clean mud mat on the front step. Next paragraph. She took off a glove and put her strong fingers down into the forest of her new chrysanthemum sprouts that were growing around the old roots. Okay, so here we have this woman, and yeah, she has on a dress, but she's got an apron hiding what she's wearing. Her whole persona is kind of androgynous. She's kind of masculine, kind of feminine, and the way she's described, handsome and strong. So she has a lot of qualities that may be somewhat masculine. She's a very strong woman. And here she is. The only role we see her doing in this whole story is taking care of her house and tending to some chrysanthemums that she has out in the yard. And these chrysanthemums almost act as her children because that's where she spends her time. There's a lot of articles about the phallic images, such as that scratcher and the trowel. You can read up on that if you want to. I'm not going there. All right. Now, what's interesting about her house and her flowers is that there is this fence that is put around her chrysanthemums that protects those chrysanthemums. We're going to read it, and let's just talk a little bit about it. All right, it says, toward the middle of the page, Eliza started at the sound of her husband's voice. He had come near quietly, and he leaned over the wire fence that protected her flower garden from cattle and dogs and chickens. You got a strong new crop coming. She straightened her back and pulled on the gardening glove again. Yes, they'll be strong this year. In her tone and on her face there was a little smugness. You got a gift with things, Henry observed. Some of those yellow chrysanthemums you've had this year were 10 inches across. I wish wish you'd worked out in the orchard and raised some apples that big. Her eyes sharpened. Maybe I could too. I've got a gift with things, all right. And then he goes, well, it sure works with flowers, he said. So she's a lot. I think she is kind of, the flowers symbolize her because she's bright, and in a few minutes we're going to see her very much blossom. But at the same time, maybe a little fragile. And just like her flowers have this cage around them to protect them, maybe her husband thinks he's protecting her. But she's extremely unhappy with her typical routine. And when he brings up the idea of, hey, you can work out in the orchard and raise some big apples, that excites her for a minute. And then he says, well, it sure works with flowers. So he kind of dismisses, has this dismissive attitude toward his wife. Okay, so I'm moving on. And in a few minutes, we're going to learn that he has sold a bunch of steers. She's completely unaware of it. So I'm not surprised. Back then, the men made the decisions. The men knew about the financial situations of the house and of the property, and she is clueless. All right. So here she is. She's out there with those flowers, and she's about to get a visit from a tinker. And a tinker would be somebody that he would stop home to home to see if there was anything that needed to be done, like scissors sharpened or something mended. Okay, so he shows up. And he's a big old guy, and he's greasy and gross, but let's just read about it. 1240, middle of the page, it says he drew a big finger down the chicken wire and made it sing. I ain't in any hurry, ma'am. I go from Seattle to San Diego and back every year. It takes all my time, about 6 months each way. I aim to follow nice weather. Notice what she does. First of all, he makes the wire sing. That's kind of romantic. Maybe. All right. Here's her reaction. Eliza took off her gloves and stuffed them into the apron pocket with the scissors. She touched the under edge of her man's hat, searching for fugitive hairs. That sounds like a nice kind of way to live, she said. So, ladies, what is she doing when we, touch our hair and we primp? She's kind of flirting with this tinker. And then he makes a bad move, and we see her she steps back. He says, maybe you've noticed the writing on the wagon. I mend pots and sharpen knives and scissors. You got any of them things for me to do? Oh, no, she said quickly. Nothing like that. Her eyes hardened with resistance. So, it's for the man, back to work and making money. That's what he wants to talk about. But at the same time, here we have Eliza, who is pretty much his equal. She knows how to mend and how to sharpen scissors herself. She could do the job that he's doing. Except he's able to get out in the world and do it, and she's stuck on her little farm. All right, but like a good salesman, he reminds me of a car salesman, he knows how to get to her. And so he brings those flowers up, and at the bottom of the page, he says, oh, those are chrysanthemums, giant whites and yellows. Kind of a long stem flower. Looks like a quick puff of smoke. I can't read, y'all. Looks like a quick puff of colored smoke, he asked. That's it. What a nice way to describe them. All right, so he's back on her good side, and he's kind of talking a quick puff of smoke. That's sort of a romantic language. All right, 1241. It says he changed his tone quickly. I like the smell myself. And then she says, I had 10-inch blooms this year. The man leaned over the fence. Look, I know a lady down the road a piece has got the nicest garden you've ever seen. Got nearly every kind of flower, but no chrysanthemums. Last time I was mending a copper bottom washed over her, she said to me, if you ever run across some nice chrysanthemums, I wish you'd try to get me a few seeds. That's what she said to me. Well, Eliza at that point, she's on board, and so she runs to get, we're looking at the red geraniums at the beginning of the story, passion. Now she's going to go get a red flower pot, more passion, and she's going to start digging up some chrysanthemums and for this tinker to take to the lady down the road. All right, as she's digging, they start having this conversation, and I can't say it, but it says she was kneeling on the ground, looking up at him, bottom of 1241. Her breast swelled passionately. The man's eyes narrowed. He looked away self-consciously. Maybe I know, he said. Sometimes in the night in the wagon there, Eliza's voice grew husky. She broke in on him. I've never lived as you do, but I know what you mean. When the night is dark, while the stars are sharp-pointed and there's quiet, while you rise up and up. Every pointed star gets driven into your body. It's like that, hot and sharp and lovely. Kneeling there, her hand went out toward his legs and his greasy black trousers. Her hesitant fingers almost touched the cloth. Then her hands dropped to the ground. She crouched like a fawning or submissive dog. He says, it's nice, just like you say, only when you don't have no dinner, it ain't. All right, so she, for the first time, they're communicating about this job and his freedom, and there's a lot of passion being discussed here. And she continues the conversation. She's like, you sleep right in that wagon, and that's just exciting for her. And then he makes a statement. He says, that's no place for a woman, and you can see right away. It says her upper lip raised a little, showing her teeth. All right, so it irritates her somewhat. But they continue talking, and for a moment, she realizes, wow, here's a man who has work. He's being compensated. He feels powerful and needed. And he's doing the same thing I know how to do. That's what's going on in her mind. All right, it's about time for him to leave. He's mended the pot. He's got the chrysanthemums that he's about to take to the neighbor next door. Yeah. And she's staring at him as he leaves. She's like, goodbye. There's a bright, what does she say? There's a bright direction. There's a glowing there. And so she watches him leave, and she runs in the house. And it really reminds me of a rape scene here, because on 1243, this is what it says. In the bathroom, she tore off her soiled clothes and flung them on the corner, and she scrubbed herself. Her legs, her thighs, her loins, her chest, her arms, until her skin was scratched and red. And when she dried herself, she stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom and looked at her body. She tightened her stomach and threw out her chest. After a while, she began to dress slowly. She put on her newest underclothing and her nicest stockings in the dress, which was a symbol of her prettiness. So she feels, she doesn't wash her fingers. That would be nasty. Pay attention to the things she's washing in this story. But she feels really strong. And so she sheds all this masculine outerwear that she's had on, and she's putting on stockings and a pretty dress. And she knows that since her husband sold those steers, that they're going out to eat that night. So her husband comes home, and notice, he says, where are you, Eliza? And she says, in my room dressing. So you can already tell there's lots of issues with their communication. She's unhappy with her life. She feels trapped. And there's not a lot of romance going on here. Watch the conversation between the two. 1243 toward the bottom. You look so nice. Nice? You think I look nice? What do you mean by nice? Henry blundered out, I don't know. I mean, you look different, strong and happy. I am strong. Yes, strong. What do you mean strong? He looked bewildered. You're playing some kind of game, he said helplessly. It's kind of play. You look strong enough to break a calf over your knee, happy enough to eat it like a watermelon. For a second, she lost her rigidity. Henry, don't talk like that. You don't know what you said. She grew complete again. I am strong, she boasted. I never knew how strong. All right, I kind of feel sorry for Henry because she's a little bit on the snippy side with him. But it also kind of shows how fed up she is with her role in life. So they're headed to town, and this is the sad part. We see that the chrysanthemums, she sees the little tinker in his little wagon ahead of them, and she sees that he has thrown the chrysanthemums in the center of the road, and he kept the pot because the pot would have made him money. And she realizes that the whole thing was a sham. He gave her that story about the woman next door wanting the chrysanthemums just so he could get work at her home. All right. He didn't even throw them in the grass where they might grow or survive. He threw them in the middle of the road. And it's at that point she begins to cry. And you see, basically she realizes man's world is kind of devoid of romance. And she is going to be stuck in that position for the rest of her life. Nothing's about to change. So all that energy that we just saw is completely gone. I'll read the very end. It says, she relaxed limply in the seat. Oh, no, I don't want to go. I'm sure I don't. Her face was turned away from him. It will be enough if we can have wine. It will be plenty. She turned up her coat collar so he could not see that she was crying weakly like an old woman. So she's left ultimately unsatisfied. All right, so if you have some questions or you notice something interesting in the story, let me know. Just email me at any time. Thanks.